This major companies delayed or cancelled nearly 30,000 truck trips last week in the wake of violent protests and looting. That figure coming from vehicle tracking and fleet management company Netstar today. It says more than three-quarters of trucks in KwaZulu-Natal were unable to travel last week. Francois Stols is the Chief Technology Officer at Netstar. He joins me now. Francois, thanks indeed for your time. So we've seen the shortage of supplies in KZN over the past week, chiefly because deliveries could not get through the unrest there. And your tracking numbers tells us why. Looking at the numbers, Francois, have you seen this scale of disruption to the trucking before this?
No, obviously, I think with the first lockdown, we saw a severe drop in number of trips and deliveries and so on. But I think this is unprecedented. We've never seen anything like this, especially in KwaZulu-Natal. As you quite rightly said, in fact, the first 2 days after the looting started, the movements of trucks in KwaZulu-Natal was down by 92%. I think it wasn't so bad in KZN. I think in KZN it was down by about 59%, but nevertheless, it was just a staggering amount of trucks that were parked.
And these figures are important because it tells you that trucking in many ways is the lifeblood of economic activity, by mere fact that it just ships goods. And you had some very interesting analogies. You said travelling miles lost because trucks were stalled is equivalent of going around the globe 15 times. That's a lot of trips lost there.
No, absolutely. And I need to put that in perspective. I think for this data analysis, we only concentrated on 3 of our big fleets. We specifically chose those fleets that sort of operate in the general transportation of goods and also distribution to retail. So that specific sample that represented the 15 trips around the world is only coming from 4,700 vehicles. So obviously that's just a fraction of the number of vehicles. So I think if you extrapolate that out to the full population of trucks operating in the KZN Gauteng area, those numbers will be even bigger.
I'm wondering what your tracking numbers are showing in terms of the rest of the country last week when the looting was at its height. I mean, obviously, you concentrated on the N3 movement in KwaZulu-Natal. But, we've been hearing that trucks were also stopped from moving when they crossed the Beitbridge border up in Limpopo, simply because it just wasn't safe enough. Were other provinces also affected in terms of trucking movements?
No, 100%. I think for this specific analysis, we focused on the movement of vehicles between Durban and Gauteng because they were the most severely affected. We will be putting an analysis out next week on the rest of the country, but I can just say, sort of anecdotally looking at the data, it wasn't as severe. There were some hotspots, but it wasn't as severe as KZN and Gauteng.
So you, as Netstar, saying today that your ground teams and helicopters have been supporting clients and law enforcement agencies throughout this crisis. Just paint a picture for us on how exactly do you give that support, especially in the coming weeks here, to the law agencies?
Yeah, so I think, there's limited support that one can give. I think that most of the support that our ground crews did, we have, of course, ground crews all over the country that typically is focused more on the recovery of stolen vehicle and assisting hijacked trucks and so on. But in this particular case, I think a lot of the focus shifted to the sort of armed support or armed escort of vehicles into high-risk areas to still try and deliver some resemblance of deliveries. So, but there were specific incidences. I think one specific incident in KwaZulu-Natal, our ground crew joined forces with the police and they managed to stop some looting, limited looting in that particular area. It was a sort of event that went on until 4 o'clock in the morning, but they managed to limit it to one shop only. And I think during that exercise, about 30 people were arrested. But generally, it was more around assisting with the safe delivery of freight where that was still possible.
And just finally, before I let you go, what are your tracking numbers telling you about how the week started? We had a very disruptive week a few days ago, last week. Are we moving back into a sense of normalcy as far as truck movements are concerned?
Yeah, I guess that's a good news. I think if you look at the numbers over the weekend, we were still sort of so just quickly, our data model was sort of looking at the 3 months prior to the unrest, and quite interesting. The lockdown 4 had a minimal effect. I think we saw only about a 2% reduction in trips with the large trucks. But if we look at the data over the last weekend, it was still sort of 50 to 60% down compared to the period prior to the unrest. But on Monday, we saw a sort of a vast recovery, and on Monday, they were almost back to normal. And when I looked at the data yesterday, we were actually 22% above the normal. So I think not only has it returned to normal, there's some catch-up taking place, and hopefully, the catch-up will help to restore the situation to normal again in the near future.
Yes, hopefully it does stay that way. Well, Francois Stols, Chief Technology Officer at Netstar, thanks very much indeed for talking to us.